Welcome back to the second to last AFC North update of the regular season. Just one more week until the playoffs start in the NFL. And after week 17 of the NFL season, the AFC North standings have solidified where what you saw in the thumbnail and what we'll talk about as the standings for the AFC North this week, that's how they're going to remain for the season. And the fates of 3 of the 4 teams in the division have already been decided, with one team still not knowing whether to prepare for another week of work at least, or to start preparing vacation plans for the offseason. Starting with the division winning Baltimore Ravens, 13-3 overall, 3-2 in the division. They put together yet another dominant win over another pretty good opponent in the Miami Dolphins. They secured not just the number 1 spot in the AFC North, but the number 1 spot in the AFC, and also the number 1 spot in the NFL just in general. 56-19 was the final score. What an insane game the Ravens had. Early, it was a little bit more of a back and forth, with Miami scoring first. The Ravens responding with a big drive from Justice Hill to tie it at 7. The Dolphins actually were up 10-7 to end the first quarter, but Tyreek Hill dropping that touchdown, I did think that swung momentum a little bit Baltimore's way, where, you know, a team kind of look at the scoreboard and think, well, being down 10-7 isn't great, but it's certainly a lot better than being down 14-7 like we could have been. And, you know, the Ravens, I think they kind of smelled blood in the water after that. Helping that momentum was Odell Beckham Jr. making another great grab, set up Baltimore deep in Miami territory to take the lead. He had a great grab on that drive. Gus Edwards finishing that drive in close to the goal line. And then once they grabbed that 14-10 lead, they would not trail again for the rest of the game, where after a Miami field goal, Zay Flowers would show off his elusiveness on a long touchdown grab, Roquan Smith with an interception into the 2-minute warning, and then Isaiah Likely with a one-handed grab on 4th down for a touchdown. Both teams aggressive early in that, going for it on 4th down. It's kind of a situation where you blink and you miss it, and it goes from 14-13 Baltimore to 28-13 Baltimore at the half. The game was never in doubt for the Ravens after that. Isaiah Likely would get another touchdown grab all alone to start the second half. Walks in the end zone. That pretty much seals the game early. Ravens defense making sure that there would be no comeback from Miami. Nothing crazy there. And the Ravens convincingly locking up the number 1 seed in the AFC. Lamar Jackson also, I think, convincingly wrapping up the MVP race as well. I know you can make some considerations for guys like Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey, but honestly, I'm not sure how you can deny Lamar Jackson and the run that he's been on. I know that, you know, some people are tired of the MVP being a quarterback-centric race, but honestly, in my opinion, Lamar Jackson, I don't think he's going to win MVP just because he's a quarterback. I think he's going to win off of just the merits of what he's done this season. I feel like even if you lean towards quarterback advantage, I think what he's done this year and how he's, carried isn't exactly a term I want to use, because like the Ravens are a good squad, but how he's led the Ravens squad to this amazing run they've been on, I think that is MVP worthy. Now the question will be, how many starters do they rest, and for how long do they rest them? Because if they don't play anyone against Pittsburgh, that will be essentially 3 weeks of not getting any game action, which might not be ideal for some guys, although the Ravens have already announced that Tyler Huntley will be the quarterback against Pittsburgh. I think that is the smart decision, keeping your franchise quarterback and likely MVP winning quarterback, keeping him safe from injury against Pittsburgh. But no matter what they do against the Steelers, this is the best team in the NFL heading into the playoffs. Good luck to whichever team has to play them on the road in the divisional round. And that team could very well end up being the second place in the AFC North Cleveland Browns, improving to an 11-5 record, 3-2 in the division. They clinched a playoff spot of their own on Thursday Night Football against the Jets. They were pretty much a shoo-in anyway, but good for them to get it done with a win on their own terms. Doing so in a fairly comfortable game at 37-20, being the final score all the way back on Thursday Night Football. And they did so on the back of what they've been thriving on the past few weeks, with another strong performance from Joe Flacco. That story hasn't ended anytime soon, and a shutdown game from the defense once again. Now, they were playing against the down-and-out Jets, led by quarterback Trevor Siemian, with Zach Wilson out for that contest, but the Jet defense had been a pretty solid unit pretty much all season. No reason for them to roll over and die, but there was only so much they could do when their offense gave them so little support for the Jets. I mean, the Jets did have some life early. They tied the game up. They got a 4th down stop, but Ronnie Hickman's pick 6 was pretty much the early turning point that let everyone know that was not going to be an interesting game. I thought Cleveland's running game looked a bit better than it did in the previous week against Houston, although that is a little bit of a concern I have with the team long term, as it's working with some depth tackles on both ends of the offensive line. But some positive injury news for the Browns. Ogbo Okoronkwo, the defensive end, is getting some practice time after he suffered an injury that was feared to be a season ender, but it seems like he's going to be able to get back on the team for their playoff run. I don't think they'll risk him all that much in that game against the Bengals this week. They've already said that they're going to be playing quarterback Jeff Driscoll against Cincinnati, with PJ Walker being the backup. Jeff Driscoll will be the 5th starter for the Browns this season. I think if he wins that game against Cincinnati, that will be an NFL record for amount of quarterbacks to start and win games in a season for the Browns. It's just been crazy. I mean, Joe Flacco falling into their laps like that and playing like he's been playing is certainly one of the craziest stories of the back half of this NFL season, just in general. So the Browns locked into the 5 seed. No real reason to risk injury to any of their starters. I don't think we're going to see a lot of premier players against the Bengals, and maybe Cincinnati will grab their first divisional win, but we'll talk about them more later in this video. And the one team whose fate is unknown right now is the 3rd place in the AFC North Pittsburgh Steelers, improving to 9-7 overall, 4-1 in the division. They got a win over the Seahawks, final score of 30-23. That was a game between a couple of 8-7 teams desperate for a win for their playoff chances, and Pittsburgh came out on top on that one, doing so thanks in large part to another big day from Mason Rudolph after Kenny Pickett was ruled inactive on Sunday. It was, it's pretty clear against Cincinnati that Rudolph gives the passing game a lot more juice than, Mitch Trubisky did, and arguably a lot more than Kenny Pickett did as well, and that was just emphasized here in this game against Seattle, where I wrote how they might have a tough decision to make at quarterback this week, but honestly, I don't think it's not all that hard, where, Mason Rudolph in his short time has been very, very good in the passing game, and Kenny Pickett has been, inconsistent at best. I think inconsistent is probably the nicest way to describe what Kenny Pickett has been this year. He was 50-50 on being healthy enough to go last week. He's certainly going to be physically ready to go in week 18. I just don't think you can make that decision to put Kenny Pickett in there when Mason Rudolph is having the type of run that he's been having. The question now becomes, does the coaching staff put more trust in Mason Rudolph? And I think they should, and that they will. Another good player for the Steelers last week was Najee Harris, who was running like a man possessed against the Seahawks defense. Had some tough runs, moving some piles around, getting, fighting for a lot of extra yards. They might have a good problem when it comes to running back and which one they should use more right now, where Jaylen Warren was also playing well against Seattle. He's been doing pretty good all season. The Pittsburgh defense showed out in the 4th quarter when they needed to. You had Herbig's strip sack. That was obviously pretty huge. Seattle did get close to the end zone a couple of times in that 4th quarter late, but they had to settle for field goals because of that defense. And, you had DK Metcalf dropping a touchdown late with Joey Porter Jr. in coverage. The Steelers eventually able to run the clock out. So the Steelers, their path to the playoffs is as follows. Ideally, they would win against Baltimore for the Steelers. Likely they'll be facing a lot of backups against the Ravens. So if the Steelers win against Baltimore, they would have to hope for a Jaguars loss or tie, or a Bills loss, or a Colts-Texans tie. If Pittsburgh ties against the Ravens, the Colts and Texans cannot tie, and the Jags have to lose for them to make the playoffs. And if Pittsburgh loses, yes, there's a path forward for Pittsburgh if the Steelers end up losing. The Colts and Texans can't tie, and the Jaguars have to lose, and the Broncos must also beat the Raiders. So those are the scenarios in which Pittsburgh, the Steelers fans are hoping for, that they can sneak their way into the playoffs. Like I said last week, no matter what happens, death, taxes, and a winning season for the Pittsburgh Steelers at 9-7 with only 1 game left. They have at least secured a record above 500. And then you get to a team with no playoff shot. They've been eliminated from postseason contention. The Bengals, 8-8 overall, 0-5 in the division. They lost to the Chiefs 25-17 at Arrowhead. I will say this for the Bengals season, it was a lot of it was clouded by Joe Burrow's health on the beginning and end of the year, even before he was out for the season, where he started the year and his calf was obviously giving him some troubles to start the year, just wasn't himself. Then after the first week or so, he started to find his groove again in the offense. That offense got moving, and just when things were starting to look super positive for Cincinnati, Joe Burrow suffers that wrist injury against Baltimore, and at that point it seems like the season's just over and gone. Jake Browning comes in, and then after a rough showing against Pittsburgh, leads Cincy to a few straight, offensively dynamic wins where you had Joe Mixon hitting his stride as well. The defense for the Bengals, that had some solid showings. I thought they were a little better than I expected at some points in the season, and the thought was that maybe they could keep it up and find a way to make it into the playoffs, but then once again they ran into a division opponent. It was the Steelers once again. Really, that loss putting a huge damper on things. Just been a bad go against the AFC North all year for Cincinnati, but they had a shot of keeping their season alive for at least one more week against a Chiefs team that was losing momentum. Things were good early. Had a Browning touchdown scramble, having the Bengals up 10 in the second quarter. They did give up a couple of field goals before half, but still a 17-13 lead going into the third quarter. I think they got a little bit greedy on a 4th and 1 in the red zone, where you might have rather kicked the field goal, probably go up by 7 there. There was a big shift in momentum, and while the Cincinnati defense was doing a decent job of bending and not breaking in the early second half, that offense was not really moving the ball at all. Kansas City able to kick field goals to get the lead. Chiefs had the ball in great field position after a return from Richie James to get up by 8, and then the Bengals' final drive would just end on a desperation 4th and 27 that would be incomplete. Browning getting sacked a lot, not just on that final drive, but just in the game overall, and the season for the Bengals went with that throw. Again, they were competitive for a lot longer than most people, including myself, thought they would be. Browning had a little fun run here with the Bengals, but unfortunately for Cincinnati, it won't last past week 18. So with all but one team's fate decided, it'll be on week 18 to see if the Steelers make the postseason or not. But everything else for the AFC North is set in stone. The standings are already going to be what they are, and the Ravens, Browns, and Bengals playoff hopes, whether they are achieved or not, or whether they're going to be, that has already been decided. And that's going to do it for me in this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far into it, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and like to see more like it. I cover some other teams in Ohio, maybe like those videos as well. But once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you at the next one.